Arthas Menethil is the greatest villain origin story in gaming history. A prince who had everything: royal blood, legendary skill, an entire kingdom that loved him, and he turned every single one of those gifts into weapons against the people he swore to protect. This is his complete timeline, from Golden Prince to the Lich King, and it starts with a man who had absolutely no business failing. Prince of Lordaeron, Arthas Menethil was born the son of King Tyrannus Menethil II of Lordaeron, one of the most powerful human kingdoms in the Eastern Kingdoms. And when I say he had everything, I mean he had everything: royal bloodline, a kingdom that adored him, martial skill that put seasoned veterans to shame, and on top of all that, the guy could wield the light like he was born for it. He trained as a paladin under Uther the Lightbringer himself, one of the first 5 members of the Order of the Silver Hand. That's like learning to box from Muhammad Ali. And Arthas didn't just keep up, he excelled, widely considered the most promising young paladin of his generation, with both magical and martial prowess that made him the obvious future of the Order. He even had a relationship with Jaina Proudmoore of Kul Tiras. They mutually ended things, though Arthas framed it as duty to his kingdom. Noble on the surface, but here's the thing: Arthas had a habit of framing his own desires as sacrifices. Remember that. It becomes important later. As a young commander, he showed genuine tactical brilliance defending Lordaeron's borders. He was good at war, possibly too good, because alongside the talent came an arrogance that even his closest allies noticed. He didn't just want to serve alongside Uther, he wanted to surpass him, not eventually. Now, and that's the part nobody talks about enough, every quality that made Arthas the perfect prince, the conviction, the ambition, the refusal to accept limitations, those are the exact same qualities that would later make him the most dangerous being on Azeroth. Was Arthas always destined to fall? Or was he a genuinely good man corrupted by forces beyond his control? Keep that question in the back of your mind, because the answer might be worse than either option. But before the fall, before the plague, before any of the choices that would define him, there was the path that shaped who Arthas was supposed to be. Order of the Silver Hand. Before Arthas ever picked up a sword, before the plague, before any of it, there was a kid who genuinely wanted to be good, and the man who believed in him more than anyone was Uther the Lightbringer. The Order of the Silver Hand was founded during the Second War, years before Arthas ever set foot in it. Its founding knights were basically the Avengers of Holy Magic: Uther the Lightbringer, Gavinrad the Dire, Saidan Dathrahan, Turalyon, and Tyrion Fordring. 5 paladins dedicated to wielding the light against evil and protecting innocents across the human kingdoms. These weren't ceremonial knights waving swords at parades, they were the real deal. The frontline defense against everything dark and terrible in Azeroth. And out of every young recruit who walked through those doors, Uther personally took Arthas as his student. Here's the thing: Uther didn't just train Arthas, he poured everything into him. Years of rigorous combat training, holy magic instruction, lessons on duty and sacrifice, the whole paladin curriculum. And Arthas absorbed it like a sponge dipped in pure talent. At just 19 years old, he was inducted as a full paladin of the Silver Hand. Not just competent, exceptional. Uther saw Arthas as the future of the Silver Hand, the best of them, the one who would carry the torch when the Old Guard finally hung up their hammers. He looked at this young prince and thought, this is the guy, which is, not ideal, given everything that happens next. There's a fan debate that's been going on for years about whether Uther should have spotted the warning signs earlier. The arrogance, the impatience, the need to prove himself at any cost. Some people defend Uther as a mentor who got blindsided by a student he loved. Others say he was so blinded by Arthas' potential that he ignored the cracks forming right in front of him. Honestly, both sides have a point, but that's the tragedy of it. Uther didn't create a monster on purpose. He created one by by believing too hard in the wrong person. But Uther's faith in Arthas wouldn't be tested by training exercises, it would be tested by a plague, a prophet, and a city full of people who had no idea what was coming. The prophet's warning. Everyone talks about the culling of Stratholme. Everyone talks about Frostmourne. But the real moment Arthas sealed his fate, it was quiet. It was a conversation, and he blew it. Before the plague had even fully taken hold, before the first city burned, a mysterious prophet appeared before King Terenas and the leaders of Lorda Aeron with a warning. This was Medivh, the Last Guardian, one of the most powerful magic users to ever walk Azeroth. He told them directly that a terrible plague was coming, that it would consume Lord Aeron, and that the kingdoms of men needed to flee west to survive. He had the credentials, he had the knowledge, he had the specifics, and the entire court, Arthas included, decided he was insane. Here's the thing, you can almost understand it. Medivh wasn't exactly handing over a PowerPoint presentation with bullet points and a timeline. His warnings were cryptic, vague, delivered with all the clarity of a fortune cookie written by someone having a bad day. He told them the end was coming without really explaining what the end looked like or how to stop it. So there's a legitimate argument that the warnings were borderline useless from a tactical standpoint, but here's where it gets complicated. Jaina Proudmoore actually took Medivh's warnings seriously enough to eventually sail west to Kalimdor. She listened. Arthas didn't. And as reports of the plague started trickling in from the northern villages, he treated it as a military problem to solve with a sword, not a catastrophe to flee from. Same information, completely different conclusions, and only one of them ended with an entire kingdom falling. Meanwhile, the plague was already moving, grain supplies going bad in ways nobody could explain across Lordaeron's outlying villages, then the people who ate that grain started changing. By the time anyone in power took the full scope of it seriously, the infection had spread across multiple settlements. Arthas had the information. He had it early enough to investigate, to quarantine, to mobilize differently. He chose arrogance instead, not malice, not cruelty, just the absolute certainty that he could fight his way through this rather than listen to some raving old prophet telling him to abandon his homeland. Fans still argue about this one. Was Medivh too cryptic? Absolutely. Was Arthas willfully stubborn? Also absolutely. Both things can be true. But the result is the same. The prince who could have changed the outcome didn't, because listening would have meant admitting he didn't have all the answers. And that quiet arrogance, it's about to cost him a city. The culling of Stratholme. This is the moment that split the entire Warcraft community in half. And honestly, it still does. Here's the situation. Arthas arrives at Stratholme and discovers that plagued grain has already been distributed throughout the city. Thousands of people have eaten it. They're not sick yet, but they will be, and when they turn, every single one of them becomes an undead soldier for the Scourge. Thousands of civilians who are, for all practical purposes, already dead, they just don't know it yet. So Arthas makes the call. Kill everyone, burn the city, prevent the Scourge from gaining thousands of new soldiers overnight. And Uther, the Lightbringer, his mentor, the man who trained him, one of the founding members of the Order of the Silver Hand, looks him in the eye and says, no, his paladins would not slaughter the innocent. Arthas disbands the Silver Hand on the spot and accuses Uther of treason. Uther takes his forces and leaves in disgust. Picture that for a second. The man who taught you everything about honor, duty, and the light walking away because he believes what you're about to do is evil, and Jaina Proudmoore, one of the few people left who still believed in him, leaving too. That image alone should tell you how far gone Arthas already was, or how impossible the situation had become, depending on who you ask, because here's the thing. Both sides of this argument have a point, and neither side is comfortable. If Arthas does nothing, those people turn. The Scourge gains an army, more cities fall. The plague spreads exponentially, and Lordaeron collapses even faster than it already was collapsing. From a pure numbers standpoint, killing thousands to save hundreds of thousands is the coldest, ugliest math you can do, but it's still math. But flip it around. What Arthas actually did was march into a city full of living, breathing people who hadn't turned yet and systematically executed them. Men, women, children, no trial, no evacuation attempt, no effort to find a cure, just fire and steel. That's not a military operation, that's a massacre wearing a uniform, and Arthas did it with Mal'Ganis taunting him the entire time. The Dreadlord was right there in the city, actively converting citizens into undead, turning the culling into a race. Arthas wasn't just killing the infected, he was competing with a demon to reach them first. Every moral anchor in his life had already walked away, and instead of stopping, he pushed harder. The seeds of his fall were planted right here. Not because some outside force corrupted him, but because the capacity for this kind of ruthless calculus was already there. The culling wasn't something done to Arthas, it was something he chose. That's what makes it so effective as a turning point. And the worst part, he might have been right to do it. That's what makes Stratholme so devastating. There's no clean answer, just a prince standing in a burning city, surrounded by bodies, convinced he did the only thing he could, but the culling wasn't enough. Arthas needed the source. He needed to end the plague at its origin, and that obsession would drag him somewhere far colder than Stratholme. The voyage to Northrend after Stratholme, Arthas had exactly 0 allies left. Uther was gone, Jaina was gone, the Paladins of the Silver Hand wanted nothing to do with him, and his own father, King Tyrannus II, sent a direct recall order for Arthas to disband his forces and return to Lordaeron immediately. Arthas ignored it. He gathered what loyal troops he still had, loaded them onto transport ships, and set sail north across the Great Sea toward Northrend. No royal approval, no blessing from the church, no support from the Alliance, just a prince with a grudge and a fleet full of soldiers who trusted him enough to follow him into the frozen unknown. And here's the thing, this wasn't some quick trip across a bay. The voyage to Northrend took weeks of open water through some of the most dangerous seas on Azeroth, waters known for violent storms, unpredictable currents, and creatures large enough to drag entire ships under the surface. Every day on that water was a day further from home, a day further from any possibility of turning back and pretending this was still a sanctioned military operation. It wasn't. This was insubordination on a royal scale. A crown prince defying his king, ignoring a direct recall, and dragging soldiers into a frozen wasteland on what amounted to a personal vendetta. Lordaeron was left in the hands of an aging father who had just watched his son purge a city full of civilians and then sail away without permission. Not ideal for kingdom stability, but the question fans have been chewing on for over 2 decades is whether Arthas was still making his own choices at this point. Was he genuinely trying to end the plague at its source? Did he truly believe that reaching Northrend and confronting whatever was up there would save his people? Or was the Lich King already inside his head, pulling him north like a fish on a line, using Arthas's obsession and guilt as the perfect leash? Because the isolation of that voyage is telling. Weeks on open water with nothing but his own thoughts, his own justifications, his own rage. No Uther to challenge him, no Jaina to ground him, no father to overrule him, just Arthas alone with whatever voice was whispering that the answer to everything was waiting in the ice. By the time those ships reached Northrend's frozen shores, the Prince of Lordaeron was already a ghost. He just didn't know it yet, but what was waiting for him in Northrend was worse than anything the sea could throw at him, because an old friend was about to hand him the key to his own destruction. Mirrodin and Frostmourne. Northrend is not a place you go to find good news, it's where hope goes to freeze to death in a ditch, and when Arthas arrived, half mad with obsession and dragging what remained of his loyal soldiers behind him, the one bright spot in that frozen wasteland was a familiar face, Mirrodin Bronzebeard, legendary dwarf explorer, veteran warrior, brother to King Magni Bronzebeard of Ironforge. The guy had been in Northrend on his own expedition searching for a powerful rune blade he'd heard rumors about. When Arthas showed up ranting about destroying Mal'Ganis, Mirrodin agreed to help, because that's what Mirrodin did. He helped people. Here's the thing about Mirrodin that makes everything worse. He wasn't some random ally. He wasn't a soldier following orders. He was a friend, a genuine trusted friend who looked at Arthas and still saw the prince worth fighting alongside. He had 0 obligation to be there, 0. He chose to stay because he believed in the man Arthas used to be, and Arthas repaid that loyalty by getting him killed. Mirrodin led Arthas deeper into the frozen wastes, toward a cave in Daggercap Bay, where they discovered a pedestal of ice containing a single weapon, Frostmourne, a cursed rune blade connected to the Lich King, designed to devour the soul of whoever wielded it and bind them to his will. The inscription on the pedestal literally warned that the blade would steal the soul of its bearer. It could not have been more clear if it had a neon sign flashing "Do not touch." Muradin read the warning. Muradin told Arthas to walk away. Muradin, the brave, loyal friend who had followed a broken prince into the most dangerous continent on Azeroth, looked him dead in the eyes and said, "This sword is cursed, we should leave it alone." Arthas grabbed it anyway. The moment Frostmourne left the ice, the pedestal shattered, a shard struck Muradin and he collapsed. Dead, or at least that's what everyone believed for years. Arthas didn't check on him, didn't kneel beside his friend, didn't even pause. He just held the sword, felt its power flood through him, and walked away. Now here's where it gets complicated. World of Warcraft later revealed that Muradin actually survived. He was found by the Frostborn, a clan of frost dwarves, alive but suffering from amnesia, which is a fascinating piece of retroactive storytelling that the community has debated endlessly, because in Warcraft 3, Muradin looks extremely dead. Some fans accept the retcon, others feel it undercuts one of the most tragic moments in the franchise. I don't know what to tell you. Both readings hurt, but regardless of whether Muradin lived or died, the meaning of the moment doesn't change. Arthas chose power over his friend. He chose a cursed weapon over the only person in Northrend who genuinely cared about him. And the second his hand closed around Frostmourne's hilt, his soul was no longer his own. The Lich King's corruption, which had been slowly building since Stratholme, was now sealed. There was no coming back from this. The Prince of Lordaeron was gone, and the thing wearing his face was about to go home. The betrayal of King Tyreenus. Picture this. A kingdom celebrates. Bells ring across the capital of Lordaeron. The prince has returned home. Banners line the streets. Citizens weep with joy. A father stands in his throne room, arms open, ready to welcome his son back from the frozen wastes of Northrend. His son is already dead. Arthas Menethil walked through the gates of Lordaeron, not as a conquering enemy, but as a returning hero. He wore his human face. He carried himself like the prince everyone remembered. And that's what makes this the single most horrifying moment in the entire Warcraft timeline. He didn't breach the walls, he didn't lay siege to the city, he didn't need to. The most powerful human kingdom on Azeroth opened its doors, rolled out the red carpet, and invited its own destruction inside for a hug. King Tyreenus Menethil II stood in the throne room as Arthas approached. Rose petals fell from above. The old king spoke with nothing but relief. "My son, I knew you would return to me." Warmth. Pride. A father seeing his boy come home. Arthas knelt before the throne and then said the words that ended everything. "You no longer need to sacrifice for your people. You no longer need to bear the weight of your crown. I've taken care of everything." Tyreenus barely had time to process what that meant before Arthas drew Frostmourne and drove it through his father's chest. No hesitation, no flicker of remorse behind those dead eyes, just a blade through the man who raised him, loved him, and spent months praying for his safe return. And here's where the fan debate gets genuinely uncomfortable. Was Arthas still in there? Was some fragment of the prince watching from behind his own eyes as his body murdered his father? Some players argue he was fully possessed by this point, a puppet of the Lich King with zero agency, just a meat suit carrying a cursed sword. Others argue the opposite, that Arthas made a conscious choice every step of the way, that claiming Frostmourne didn't erase his will but simply removed his restraint. Either answer is terrifying. If he was a puppet, then the Lich King used a father's love as a weapon, which is psychopathic on a cosmic scale. If Arthas chose this, then the Prince of Lordaeron looked his own father in the eye and decided to kill him anyway. I don't know which version lets me sleep at night. Neither, probably. With Tyreenus dead, the kingdom's fate was sealed. There was no magical orb protecting the city. There didn't need to be. The protection Lordaeron had was its walls, its army, and its king. Arthas removed the one that mattered most. The scourge poured into the capital like water through a broken dam. Thousands died. The greatest human city on Azeroth fell not because it lost a war, but because a father trusted his son. This was the moment Arthas' transformation became permanent and total. Whatever thread still connected him to his humanity, to his training as a paladin, to the memory of Uther's teachings, to the boy who once wanted to protect his people, it snapped. The prince was gone. The Death Knight was all that remained. And a Death Knight with the keys to a fallen kingdom is a dangerous thing. But what Arthas did next with the Scourge's army made the fall of Lord Aeron look like a warm-up. The Death Knight of the Scourge. Here's what makes Arthas terrifying. He didn't die. That's the part people get wrong. Most Death Knights are corpses reanimated by dark magic, puppets with no will of their own. Arthas was still alive, still breathing, still thinking with the same mind that once swore oaths to protect Lordaeron. He wasn't a body being piloted by the Lich King. He was a living man who walked into his father's throne room, drove Frostmourne through the king's chest, and then got to work. And the work was horrifying. With Tyrrhenus dead and the capital in chaos, Arthas turned Lordaeron into a factory. Every soldier who fell defending their homes got back up and joined the army that killed them. Every village that resisted was razed and its population added to the Scourge's ranks. The math is simple and nightmarish. You don't need supply lines when your enemy is the supply line. Every battle the humans fought made Arthas stronger. Every loss was a net gain. The kingdom didn't just fall, it fed the thing that was eating it. As the Lich King's champion, Arthas commanded power that made his paladin days look like a warm-up. Frostmourne devoured the souls of everyone it killed, growing stronger with every swing. He could raise entire battlefields of corpses with a gesture. Death magic poured out of him like it was nothing. He swept across Lordaeron and then carried the Scourge's campaign to other lands, and his name became the single most feared title on the continent, second only to the Lich King himself, which is, not ideal for everyone else alive. But here's where the fan debate gets interesting. Was any of the old Arthas still in there? Some players argue he was completely gone the moment he picked up Frostmourne, that this was just a monster wearing a prince's face. Others point to the fact that he retained his tactical brilliance, his ambition, his need to prove himself. Those aren't Lich King traits, those are Arthas traits. The cruelty wasn't random, it was personal. He didn't just conquer Lordaeron, he specifically targeted the people and institutions that defined his old life. The Silver Hand, the human kingdoms, his own people. That's not a puppet following orders, that's a man who chose a side and committed to it with everything he had. The people of Lordaeron had raised a prince to protect them. They'd celebrated his victories, cheered his name, trusted him with their future, and he repaid every single one of them by turning their corpses into soldiers for the army that destroyed their kingdom. Not because he was forced to, not because he had no choice, because Frostmourne offered him power, and he took it. Because the Lich King offered him purpose and he accepted it. Whatever fragment of the old Arthas might have still existed behind those cold eyes, it wasn't strong enough to stop him. And honestly, it might not have wanted to, but if you think Arthas was content being someone else's weapon forever, you clearly don't know him very well. The Siege of Icecrown. Most people hear siege and picture armies crashing against walls, heroes making last stands, catapults launching flaming boulders. That's not what happened at Icecrown. This wasn't a war. This was a coronation rehearsal. After decimating Lordaeron and raising entire populations into undead servitude, Arthas turned his attention back to Northrend, specifically to Icecrown Glacier and the frozen throne that sat at its peak. The Lich King needed his champion to return, and Arthas was the one answering the call. Or more accurately, the cursed runeblade that eats souls for breakfast was doing the answering for him. Here's the thing. The campaign through Icecrown wasn't about breaking through enemy defenses, it was about eliminating every obstacle standing between Arthas and the Frozen Throne. Illidan Stormrage and his forces, the Nerubian remnants, anything with a pulse and the audacity to exist near the Lich King's seat of power. Arthas led Scourge forces through Northrend's frozen wastes and systematically crushed all resistance until nothing stood between him and his master. Not a single enemy force was left intact, not a single challenger was left breathing, and the urgency was real. The Frozen Throne was cracking. Illidan's earlier ritual using the Eye of Sargeras had damaged it, and the Lich King's power was bleeding out. This wasn't empire building at leisure, this was a desperate race to reach the throne before it shattered completely. Arthas fought his way through Illidan's forces, including a direct duel with Illidan himself at the base of the Frozen Throne. Commander, duelist, executioner, whatever the Lich King needed, Arthas delivered. But here's where it gets complicated. During this entire campaign, Arthas occupied a strange position. He was the most powerful Death Knight in the Scourge's hierarchy, the Lich King's chosen champion. He wielded Frostmourne. He commanded armies that could swallow nations. On paper, he was the Lich King's right hand, the ultimate instrument. But the relationship between Arthas and the entity calling to him was shifting in ways that nobody, possibly not even Arthas, fully understood. Was he becoming more independent? Some fans argue yes, that each victory, each demonstration of tactical brilliance was Arthas quietly accumulating power and influence that would eventually let him transcend his role as servant. Others argue the exact opposite, that every campaign he waged, every soul Frostmourne consumed, every order he followed without hesitation was pulling him deeper into the Lich King's consciousness. Not growing stronger, being digested. The truth is probably worse than either option. Arthas wasn't fighting the Lich King's control, and he wasn't blindly obeying it, he was becoming it. The line between servant and master was dissolving slowly, like ice melting into water. You can't separate them once they mix. And when Arthas finally ascended the Frozen Throne and placed the Helm of Domination on his head, the distinction between Arthas Menethil and the Lich King ceased to exist entirely. This was the last chapter of Arthas as a separate entity. The Death Knight who murdered his father, destroyed his kingdom, and carved a path of corpses through the frozen north. Everything he'd done, every atrocity, every betrayal, it was all leading somewhere. And that somewhere was a throne of ice waiting for him to sit down and never get back up. The Lich King. Here's the part that should terrify you more than anything else in this entire story. Arthas didn't die fighting. He didn't go out in some blaze of glory or make one final catastrophic choice that sealed his fate. He just disappeared, slowly, quietly, like a candle burning down to nothing in an empty room. When Arthas ascended the Frozen Throne and placed the Helm of Domination on his head, he merged with Ner'zhul, the orc shaman whose spirit had been trapped inside the helm for years. Two minds, two wills, two beings with completely different histories and motivations fused into a single entity. Ner'zhul had centuries of cunning and ancient magic. Arthas had raw human willpower, tactical genius, and the kind of ambition that had already leveled an entire kingdom. The two of them wrestled for dominance inside the same body, each trying to consume the other. Arthas won, or at least something wearing Arthas's face won, because here's the thing. The entity that emerged wasn't Arthas Menethil with extra power. It wasn't Ner'zhul with a new body. It was something else entirely. The Lich King, a being that commanded absolute authority over every undead creature on Azeroth, every ghoul, every abomination, every Death Knight, every Valkyr, all connected to one will. And that will had zero interest in being a prince or paladin or son or anything remotely human. The Lich King embodied Ner'zhul's ancient magical knowledge and Arthas's battlefield brilliance. Martial, magical, strategic. There was literally nothing on Azeroth that could challenge him alone, but the cost was total. Ner'zhul's consciousness got suppressed, devoured. Arthas cast out every remnant of the orc shaman spirit until only one dominant will remained, and that will wasn't really Arthas anymore. The Prince of Lordaeron, the boy who trained under Uther, the paladin who once genuinely wanted to save his people, effectively ceased to exist. What was left was just the Lich King. Cold, singular, absolute. And that's the quiet horror of it. Nobody killed Arthas. Nobody defeated him in some climactic duel. He was erased, gradually, like a name written in sand while the tide comes in. One day there was a person in there, and then there wasn't. Just the Scourge wearing his armor, sitting on his throne, commanding millions of undead with a mind that remembered being human the way you remember a dream from 3 years ago. Not enough to matter. Now, years later, World of Warcraft. Shadowlands threw a wrench into this. The expansion revealed that when Arthas finally died atop Icecrown Citadel, his soul passed into the Shadowlands, reduced to a tiny flickering wisp. Not a trapped consciousness screaming behind his own eyes, but something even more tragic. Almost nothing remained of him at all. The community absolutely erupted, because it meant the Golden Prince of Lordaeron, after everything he did and everything done to him, didn't even get the dignity of a dramatic afterlife. He just faded into almost nothing. Fans still argue about it. Some believe reducing Arthas to a fading wisp robbed the character of his weight. Others argue total dissolution is the only fitting end for a man who slaughtered his own father and burned his kingdom to ash, that there should be nothing left. And honestly, both interpretations are devastating, because that's the complete arc of Arthas Menethil, Golden Prince of the most powerful human kingdom on Azeroth, Paladin of the Silver Hand, a man who loved his people so much he was willing to butcher an entire city to save them. And in the end, none of it mattered. Not the training, not the lineage, not the good intentions. Every single choice he made, from ignoring Medivh's warning to picking up Frostmourne to climbing that frozen staircase, led to the same place. A throne at the top of the world, surrounded by millions of servants with nobody left inside to sit on it. Not all stories have a point, but this one does. And the point is that Arthas Menethil didn't fall. He walked, one step at a time, all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.